In a quiet little town in Ohio, where the mornings were crisp and the afternoons warm, there was a middle school that stood at the edge of Maple Street. It wasn't anything fancy, just a two-story brick building with faded paint on its walls and squeaky floorboards inside. But for 12-year-old Ethan Carter, it was more than just a place to learn math or science. It was where he faced one of the toughest challenges of his young life. Ethan was an ordinary boy. He had messy brown hair that always seemed to stick out in odd directions, no matter how much gel his mom tried to use. His clothes were simple too, a blue hoodie, jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. What set him apart from most kids his age was his imagination. Ethan loved stories. Whether they came from books, movies, or even the tales his grandpa told him late at night, he soaked them all up like a sponge. And out of all those stories, none fascinated him more than the ones about his grandfather, Jack Carter. Jack lived just down the road from Ethan's house. Every weekend, Ethan would visit him, sitting cross-legged on the porch while Jack shared memories of his younger days. According to Grandpa Jack, he'd been a kickboxing champion back in the 1960s. Not just any champion, he was known as the Iron Fist, a man who could knock out opponents with a single punch. Ethan listened wide-eyed as Jack described matches, held in smoky arenas packed with cheering crowds. Sometimes Jack would even demonstrate his old moves, throwing slow-motion kicks and punches in the air, laughing when Ethan tried to copy him. But not everyone believed these stories. At least, not outside their family. To most people in town, Jack was just another retired man who spent his days gardening and watching old westerns on TV. So when Ethan decided to bring up his grandfather during history class one Thursday afternoon, he didn't expect things to go quite so wrong. It started innocently enough. Mr. Grayson, the history teacher, was leading a discussion about influential figures from the past. He asked the students if anyone had relatives who had done something remarkable. The question hung in the air for a moment before hands began to rise tentatively. One girl talked about her great-grandmother, who had fought for women's rights. Another boy mentioned his uncle, who served in the military. When it came time for Ethan to speak, he hesitated. He glanced around the room, feeling the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on him. Finally, taking a deep breath, Ethan said softly, "My grandpa. He was a kickboxing legend." For a second, there was silence. Then someone snickered. Ethan's face flushed red as more giggles erupted around the room. Even Mr. Grayson couldn't hold back a smirk. "A kickboxing legend, huh?" the teacher said, leaning casually against his desk. "And here I thought your grandpa was the guy who trims hedges for a living." The comment sent the class into fits of laughter. Ethan sank lower in his seat, wishing he could disappear. He wanted to explain that his grandpa really was amazing, that he'd won trophies and trained other fighters, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he stared at the scuffed surface of his desk, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Lily Harper, a shy girl who usually kept to herself, watched the scene unfold with a pang of sympathy. She knew what it felt like to be laughed at. Last year, she'd proudly told her classmates that her grandmother worked at NASA, only to have them roll their eyes and call her a liar. Now, seeing Ethan squirm under the ridicule, she wished she could say something to make him feel better. But like Ethan, she stayed silent. Mr. Grayson wasn't done yet. With a chuckle, he added, "Come on, Ethan. You can't seriously believe that your grandpa is some kind of superhero." More laughter followed, and Ethan's cheeks burned hotter. He clenched his fists under the table, trying to ignore the taunts swirling around him. "Yeah, maybe he fought aliens," one boy joked, earning another round of snickers. "Or dinosaurs," chimed in another. By now, Ethan felt like crawling under his desk and hiding until the end of the day. The bell finally rang, cutting through the noise like a lifeline. Without waiting for dismissal, he grabbed his backpack and bolted out of the classroom, ignoring the calls of "Wait, Ethan" from Lily and the lingering jeers from his classmates. As he hurried down the hallway, Ethan's mind raced. Why had he even bothered to tell them about Grandpa Jack? No one ever believed him anyway. Maybe Mr. Grayson was right. Maybe he should stop talking about his family altogether. After all, what did it matter if people thought his grandpa was just an ordinary old man? Unbeknownst to Ethan, however, fate had other plans. That very same afternoon, a stranger arrived at the school. A man whose presence would change everything, not just for Ethan, but for everyone who doubted the power of a good story. Later that afternoon, the school buzzed with excitement, or at least as much excitement as a group of middle schoolers could muster on a Thursday. The intercom crackled to life just as Ethan was trying to focus on his math worksheet in Mrs. Peterson's class. He didn't want to think about what had happened earlier. The memory of Mr. Grayson's mocking tone and the laughter of his classmates still stung too much. But when Principal Dawson's voice came through the speakers, it pulled him out of his thoughts. "Attention, students," Principal Dawson announced. "We have a special guest speaker visiting our auditorium today. Everyone is expected to be respectful and attentive. Please report to the auditorium immediately after your current class ends." The announcement was met with groans. Guest speakers were rarely exciting. Most of them talked about topics like health or careers, things that made the students' eyes glaze over within minutes. Ethan sighed, figuring this would be another boring lecture he'd have to endure. Still, he packed up his things slowly, hoping to delay the inevitable for as long as possible. When the bell finally rang, the hallways filled with chatter. Students shuffled toward the auditorium, dragging their feet and complaining under their breath. Ethan stayed near the back of the crowd, keeping his head down. He didn't want to talk to anyone, not even Lily Harper, who tried to catch his eye as they walked past each other. All he wanted was to get through the day without drawing any more attention to himself. The auditorium was already half full by the time Ethan found a seat near the back. He chose a spot where he could blend into the shadows, away from prying eyes. Slowly, the room grew quieter as the last few stragglers filed in. Then, the lights dimmed, and Principal Dawson stepped onto the stage. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Today we are honored to welcome a very special guest. Many of you may recognize him from movies, television, or perhaps even memes online. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Chuck Norris." For a moment there was complete silence. Then the doors at the side of the stage opened and a man walked in. He wore cowboy boots, faded jeans, and a black hat tilted slightly forward. His presence commanded attention instantly. Whispers erupted throughout the auditorium, growing louder until they turned into cheers and applause. Even Ethan, who had been determined to stay invisible, found himself sitting up straighter in his seat. Chuck Norris smiled warmly as he approached the microphone. When he spoke, his voice was calm but firm, the kind that made people listen without question. "Thank you all for having me here today," he said. "I know some of you might be wondering why an old guy like me is standing in front of you. Well, let me tell you. It's because I believe every one of you has potential. You're the future leaders, thinkers, and creators of this world. And if my journey can inspire even one person in this room, then I've done my job." Ethan leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. There was something genuine about Chuck's words, something that resonated with him. As Chuck continued speaking, he shared stories from his own life, how he grew up in a modest household, how he trained tirelessly to become a martial artist, and how he faced challenges along the way. He talked about discipline, perseverance, and the importance of treating others with respect. "There's a saying I live by," Chuck said, pausing for effect. "It's not about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. Life will knock you down, sometimes. People might laugh at you, doubt you, or tell you that you're not good enough, but none of that matters unless you let it stop you." Ethan felt those words sink deep into his chest. They reminded him of his grandpa Jack, the way Jack always encouraged him to stand tall no matter what anyone else said. For the first time since history class, Ethan allowed himself to feel hopeful again. Maybe telling people about his grandpa wasn't such a bad thing after all. Maybe it was worth believing in the stories that mattered to him. As the speech went on, Ethan noticed something unusual. Chuck seemed genuinely interested in connecting with the audience. He didn't just stand behind the podium and deliver lines. He moved around the stage, making eye contact with different sections of the room. At one point, he asked if anyone had questions. Hands shot up eagerly, and Chuck answered each one patiently, sharing advice and anecdotes. Finally, he reached the end of his presentation. "Before I go," he said, "I want to remind you all of something important. We often hear stories about heroes, legends, and extraordinary people. But real greatness isn't always about fame or trophies. It's about the choices we make, the effort we put in, and the kindness we show to others. Remember that." With that, Chuck stepped back from the microphone, and the auditorium erupted into applause once more. Ethan clapped along with everyone else, feeling a strange mix of admiration and curiosity. Something about Chuck's demeanor reminded him of Grandpa Jack, the quiet confidence, the wisdom in his words, the way he carried himself with dignity. After the speech, most students rushed out of the auditorium, eager to return to their usual routines. But Ethan lingered near the back, watching as Chuck greeted a few teachers and signed autographs for some of the bolder kids who dared approach him. Ethan hesitated, unsure whether he should say anything. After all, what could he possibly have to say to someone like Chuck Norris? To his surprise, Chuck noticed him lingering by the exit. The legendary figure raised an eyebrow and gestured for Ethan to come closer. Heart pounding, Ethan obeyed, shuffling nervously toward the stage. "Hey there, kid," Chuck said, his tone friendly. "You look like you've got something on your mind." Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how dry his throat felt. Hi, Mr. Norris," he managed to stammer. I just wanted to say thanks for coming today. Your speech was really cool." Chuck grinned. "You're welcome, but you seem like you've got more to say than that. What's going on?" Ethan hesitated again, debating whether to open up. Finally, he decided to take a chance. "Well, earlier today, I told my teacher that my grandpa used to be a kickboxing legend. Everyone laughed at me, though. They didn't believe me." Chuck's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "A kickboxing legend, huh? That's quite a claim. What's your grandpa's name?" "Jack Carter," Ethan replied softly. The moment the name left his lips, Chuck's eyes widened in recognition. He stared at Ethan for a long moment, then let out a low whistle. "Jack Carter," he repeated almost to himself. "Now that is a name I haven't heard in years." Ethan blinked in shock. You know him?" Chuck nodded slowly. "Know him? Son, your grandpa taught me some of the moves that made me famous. Jack Carter wasn't just a kickboxer, he was a pioneer. One of the best fighters I ever saw in action. If anyone deserves the title of legend, it's him." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. For the first time all day, he felt like he could breathe freely. Someone as incredible as Chuck Norris, believed in his grandpa's story. Believed in his story. Chuck placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Listen, kid. Don't let anyone make you doubt who you are or where you come from. Family legacies are powerful things. They shape us, guide us, and remind us of what truly matters. Hold on to that." With those words, Chuck gave Ethan a reassuring pat and turned to leave. But before he disappeared through the doorway, he glanced back over his shoulder. "Oh, and Ethan?" he added with a wink. "Tell your grandpa I said hello." And just like that, Chuck Norris was gone, leaving Ethan standing in stunned silence. Around him, the auditorium emptied out, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind raced with possibilities. Could this really be happening? Could the ridicule and embarrassment of earlier today actually lead to something amazing? Little did Ethan know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change not only his perspective, but the entire town's understanding of what it meant to be a hero. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what Chuck Norris had said. The words replayed in his mind over and over as he walked home from school that afternoon. His steps were lighter than they'd been all day, and for the first time since history class, he didn't feel weighed down by embarrassment. Instead, a flicker of excitement grew inside him. Chuck Norris, the real actual Chuck Norris, knew his grandpa Jack. Not only did he know him, but he respected him too. When Ethan reached his house, he found his mom in the kitchen preparing dinner. She looked up from chopping vegetables and smiled when she saw him. "Hey, kiddo," she said. "How was school?" Ethan hesitated. Normally, he would give her a quick answer and head to his room, but today was different. Today he had something important to share. "Mom, you won't believe what happened," he began, dropping his backpack on the floor. He told her everything, from the teasing in Mr. Grayson's class to Chuck Norris showing up at school and recognizing Grandpa Jack's name. His mom listened quietly, her eyes widening with each detail. When Ethan finished, she set the knife down and gave him a hug. "That's incredible, Ethan," she said. "Your grandpa will be so happy to hear this." The thought made Ethan grin. Without wasting another second, he ran out the back door and down the street to his grandpa's house. It wasn't far, a short walk through the neighborhood, and soon he was standing on Jack Carter's porch. The old man was sitting in his favorite chair, reading a worn-out paperback novel. A cup of tea steamed gently on the side table next to him. "Grandpa," Ethan called out, bounding up the steps. "You'll never guess what happened today." Jack looked up, his gray eyebrows raised in curiosity. "What's got you all fired up, champ?" he asked, closing his book. Ethan launched into the story, starting with how he'd told his classmates about Jack being a kickboxing legend. He described the laughter, Mr. Grayson's mocking comment, and then the moment Chuck Norris walked into the auditorium. When he mentioned Chuck knowing Jack personally, the older man's expression changed. A faint smile spread across his weathered face. "Well, I'll be," Jack murmured, leaning back in his chair. "Chuck Norris, huh? Now there's a name I haven't heard in decades." "You knew him?" Ethan asked, even though Chuck had already confirmed it. Jack chuckled softly. "Knew him. Kid, I trained him. Back in my fighting days, Chuck was just a young kid trying to learn the ropes. He had heart, though. You could see it in the way he carried himself. We worked together for a while, and let me tell you, he picked things up faster than anyone I'd ever met." Ethan stared at his grandpa in awe. This was the kind of story he loved hearing, but now it felt bigger somehow. It wasn't just a bedtime tale anymore, it was real, and Chuck Norris had come to their little town because of it. "So, why didn't you tell me about this before?" Ethan asked after a pause. Jack shrugged. "Some stories are better left in the past, son. My glory days are long gone, and I'm happy with the life I've built here. But if people like Chuck still remember them, well, maybe there's something to that." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of tires crunching on gravel caught their attention. They both turned to see a car pulling into the driveway. Ethan's heart skipped a beat when he recognized the driver stepping out. It was Chuck Norris. "Speak of the devil," Jack muttered under his breath, though there was a twinkle in his eye. Chuck approached the porch with a warm smile. "Jack?" "Carter," he said, extending a hand. "It's been too long." Jack stood slowly, gripping Chuck's hand firmly. "Chuck Norris," he replied, matching the younger man's smile. "What brings you to my neck of the woods?" Chuck gestured toward Ethan. "This young man here. He reminded me of some lessons I learned a lifetime ago. Thought it was high time I paid my respects to the man who taught them to me." For the next hour, the three of them sat on the porch, swapping stories and reminiscing about the past. Chuck shared memories of his early training days, recalling how Jack's tough love approach had shaped him into the fighter he became. Jack laughed at some of the anecdotes, adding his own details where necessary. Ethan listened intently, soaking up every word. At one point, Chuck turned to Ethan. "Your grandpa doesn't just talk the talk, kid. He walks the walk. There's a reason people used to call him the Iron Fist. He earned that title fair and square." Ethan beamed with pride. Hearing these words from someone like Chuck made him realize just how special his grandpa truly was. For years, he'd believed the stories Jack told him, but now he had proof. Proof that his grandpa wasn't just an ordinary man. He was extraordinary. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the yard, Chuck stood up to leave. "I hate to cut this short, but I've got places to be," he said. Before heading to his car, he turned to Ethan. "Don't forget what I said earlier, okay? Stand tall, believe in your family's legacy, and don't let anyone make you doubt. Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of determination. I won't, Mr. Norris, thank you. With a final wave, Chuck climbed into his car and drove off. Ethan watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, then turned back to his Grandpa. This is amazing, Grandpa, he said. Why didn't you ever tell anyone about all this? Jack sighed, his gaze distant. Fame fades, Ethan. What matters most is how you treat people and the values you pass on. Those trophies and titles, they're nice, sure, but they don't define who you are. I wanted to focus on building a good life here, raising a family, and helping others along the way. That's what really counts. Ethan thought about this for a moment. He understood what his grandpa meant, but he also realized something else. People needed to know about Jack's achievements, not because of the fame or glory, but because it was part of their family's story. It was a piece of history worth sharing. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a plan. He dressed quickly and headed to school, his mind racing with ideas. By lunchtime, he'd gathered the courage to speak to Mr. Grayson. The teacher was grading papers at his desk when Ethan knocked on the classroom door. Mr. Grayson? Ethan said hesitantly. Can I talk to you for a minute? Mr. Grayson looked up, surprised. Of course, Ethan. Come in. Ethan stepped inside, clutching a small notebook. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I shouldn't have gotten upset when everyone laughed. But I also wanted to tell you something. My grandpa really was a kickboxing legend. Chuck Norris came to our school yesterday and he knew all about him. He even visited my grandpa last night. Mr. Grayson blinked, clearly taken aback. Wait, Chuck Norris? As in the Chuck Norris? Ethan nodded. Yeah, and he said my grandpa trained him, so I guess what I'm saying is I wasn't lying, I just didn't have proof until now. There was a long pause as Mr. Grayson processed this information. Finally, he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Ethan, I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have dismissed your story like that. If what you're saying is true, then your grandpa sounds like an incredible man. I'm sorry for doubting you. Relief washed over Ethan. He hadn't expected Mr. Grayson to admit he was wrong, but it felt good to hear it. Thanks, Mr. Grayson. I just wanted to set the record straight. Later that day, during homeroom, Mr. Grayson made an announcement to the entire class. Yesterday, we had a guest speaker visit our school, someone many of you might recognize. His name is Chuck Norris. Murmurs rippled through the room as students exchanged glances. But what some of you may not know is that Chuck has ties to our community, specifically to Ethan Carter's grandfather, Jack Carter, who happens to be a kickboxing legend. The class fell silent. Ethan felt his cheeks grow warm as all eyes turned to him. Mr. Grayson continued. I misjudged Ethan's story, and for that I apologize. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and we should always listen before jumping to conclusions. The end of the day, Ethan noticed a change in how his classmates treated him. No one teased him anymore. In fact, several kids approached him during recess, asking questions about his grandpa. Even Lily Harper joined in, offering a shy smile as she congratulated him. That evening, as Ethan sat on the porch with his grandpa, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The ridicule he'd faced earlier in the week now seemed insignificant compared to the newfound respect he'd earned for himself and for his family. Jack patted him on the shoulder. Proud of you, champ, he said. You handled this whole thing with grace. That's what makes you a true champion. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan believed it. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Ethan. News of Chuck Norris visiting his grandpa spread quickly through the school, and even reached the local newspaper. Reporters began calling the Carters home, asking to interview Jack about his legendary kickboxing career. At first, Jack was reluctant. He didn't want the attention, preferring the quiet life he'd built for himself in retirement. But Ethan convinced him that sharing his story could inspire others. It's not just about you, Grandpa, Ethan had said one evening as they sat on the porch. It's about showing people that hard work and kindness can make a difference. You're proof of that. Jack thought it over and finally agreed. The following weekend, a small team from the local news station arrived at their house. They set up cameras in the living room and asked Jack to talk about his past. As he recounted tales of his training days, his matches, and the lessons he'd passed on to fighters like Chuck Norris, Ethan watched with pride. His grandpa wasn't just telling stories. He was painting a picture of resilience, humility, and strength. After the interview aired, things changed even more. People in town who had once dismissed Jack as an ordinary retiree now greeted him with respect. Some even stopped by the house to thank him for inspiring them. Ethan noticed how much happier his grandpa seemed. It wasn't the fame or recognition that mattered. It was knowing that his legacy had touched lives. At school, Ethan became something of a celebrity too. Students who used to tease him now treated him differently. A group of boys invited him to join their lunch table, peppering him with questions about his grandpa. Even Mr. Grayson made an effort to mend fences, often praising Ethan during class discussions. One afternoon, after a particularly lively history lesson, Mr. Grayson pulled Ethan aside. "Listen, Ethan," he said, his tone sincere. "I've been thinking about what you shared with me. I'd like to do something special. Maybe dedicate a day in class to discussing your grandpa's achievements. Would that be okay with you?" Ethan blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected this kind of gesture from Mr. Grayson. "Really? You'd do that?" Mr. Grayson nodded. "Absolutely. Your grandpa's story is important, not just because of his accomplishments, but because of the values he represents. Hard work, perseverance, respect. Those are lessons everyone should learn." Ethan couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, I think he'd like that." Over the weekend, Ethan helped Mr. Grayson prepare for the presentation. Together, they gathered old photographs of Jack in action, trophies he'd won, and even a video clip of one of his famous matches. On Monday morning, the classroom buzzed with anticipation. When the bell rang, Mr. Grayson stood at the front of the room, holding up a framed photo of Jack mid-punch. "Today," he began, "we're going to talk about someone truly remarkable. This man isn't just a part of our community. He's a piece of history. Meet Jack Carter, also known as the Iron Fist." As Mr. Grayson spoke, Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. Hearing his grandpa's name spoken with such admiration meant more to him than words could express. The students listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about Jack's training methods and the challenges he faced. By the end of the lesson, several kids stayed behind to thank Ethan for sharing his grandpa's story. Later that week, something unexpected happened. Chuck Norris returned to the school, not for another speech, but to personally thank Jack for reconnecting him with memories of his own journey. This time, the visit was quieter. Chuck met with Ethan, Jack, and Principal Dawson in the school library, where they discussed ways to promote values like discipline and respect among young people. "You know," Chuck said, leaning back in his chair, "there's power in storytelling. Your grandpa's story reminds us all of what we can achieve if we put our minds to it. Maybe we should find a way to share it with more people." Principal Dawson nodded enthusiastically. "We could organize an event, a community gathering maybe. Invite families from across the district to hear Jack's story firsthand." Ethan glanced at his grandpa, who looked both surprised and touched by the suggestion. "I don't know about all that," Jack said with a chuckle. "I'm no public speaker." "You won't have to be," Chuck replied. "Just be yourself. That's enough." And so, plans were made. Flyers went up around town announcing a special evening dedicated to Jack Carter's legacy. Local businesses donated food and supplies, while volunteers worked tirelessly to transform the school gym into a welcoming space. On the night of the event, the room was packed with families, teachers, and curious neighbors. Even Mayor Peterson showed up, eager to honor one of the town's unsung heroes. When it was time for Jack to speak, Ethan walked him to the stage. The older man gripped the microphone nervously, scanning the crowd. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure of what to say. Then he spotted Ethan standing off to the side, giving him an encouraging thumbs up. Taking a deep breath, Jack began to talk. "I never thought my story would matter to anyone outside my family. he admitted, his voice steady. But here we are, and if there's one thing I hope you take away tonight, it's this. Success isn't measured by trophies or titles. It's measured by the impact you have on others. Be kind, work hard, and never forget where you came from. The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Ethan watched as tears welled up in his mom's eyes and saw Lily Harper clapping enthusiastically from the front row. Even Mr. Grayson looked moved, nodding along with Jack's words. After the event, dozens of people lined up to shake Jack's hand. Some thanked him for his service to the sport. Others simply expressed gratitude for reminding them of the importance of character. Ethan stood nearby, soaking it all in. This was more than he'd ever imagined when he'd shyly mentioned his grandpa in class just weeks ago. That night, as they drove home together, Ethan turned to Jack. "You did great, Grandpa." Everyone loved it. Jack chuckled softly. "I'll admit it felt good to see people care about something bigger than themselves. But none of this would have happened without you, champ. You believed in me when no one else did." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "That's because you're my hero, Grandpa. Always have been." In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after such an extraordinary experience. Jack went back to tending his garden, though he occasionally received letters from fans thanking him for his inspiration. Ethan found himself growing more confident at school, speaking up in class and making new friends. Even Mr. Grayson continued to use Jack's story as an example in his lessons, reinforcing the values of perseverance and respect. But the ripple effects of those events extended far beyond Ethan and his family. Across the town, people began to embrace the idea that everyone has a story worth telling, and that listening to those stories can change perspectives. Teachers encouraged students to share their own family histories, fostering a sense of connection and understanding. Neighbors started looking out for one another, inspired by Jack's message of kindness and community. For Ethan, the biggest lesson came not from the fame or attention, but from the realization that standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard, can lead to incredible outcomes. He learned that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about facing fear head-on, trusting in the truth of your story, and finding strength in the people who support you. And as he lay in bed each night, replaying the events of the past month in his mind, Ethan knew one thing for certain. His grandpa wasn't just a legend in the world of kickboxing. He was a legend in Ethan's heart, and nothing could ever change that. Months passed, and the excitement in the small Ohio town began to settle into a quieter rhythm. The buzz around Jack Carter's legacy didn't fade completely, but it transformed into something deeper, a sense of pride that lingered in the Dow community. Ethan noticed this change in subtle ways. Teachers at school started incorporating more personal storytelling into their lessons, encouraging students to share glimpses of their own family histories. Parents talked about Jack's story at dinner tables, using it as an example of how hard work and kindness could leave a lasting impact. Even the local library added a shelf dedicated to biographies of unsung heroes, inspired by Jack's unexpected rise to recognition. For Ethan, life felt different too. He no longer shied away from speaking up in class or sharing his thoughts with others. When someone teased him, whether about his clothes or his hobbies, he brushed it off with a smile, knowing that confidence came from within. It wasn't always easy, but he reminded himself of what Chuck Norris had said. It's not about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. Those words stuck with him, giving him strength on tough days. Home, Ethan spent more time with his grandpa than ever before. They worked together in Jack's garden, pulling weeds and planting new flowers. Sometimes they'd sit on the porch after sunset, watching fireflies blink in the dark. On those evenings, Jack would tell Ethan stories not just about kickboxing, but about life. He spoke of mistakes he'd made, challenges he'd faced, and the people who had helped him along the way. Each tale carried a lesson, one Ethan stored carefully in his memory. One Saturday morning, Ethan woke up to find his mom bustling around the kitchen, She was making pancakes, her favorite way to celebrate special occasions. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Today's a big day," she replied with a grin. "Didn't your grandpa tell you? The mayor is coming over to present him with an award." Ethan's jaw dropped. "An award? For what?" "For being an inspiration to the community," his mom explained. Mayor Peterson thought it was long overdue. By noon, the living room was filled with neighbors, friends, and even a few reporters. Mayor Peterson arrived promptly at 1 o'clock, carrying a framed certificate engraved with elegant lettering. As everyone gathered around, he cleared his throat and began to speak. "Jack Carter isn't just a name in our town's history books," the mayor said, his voice warm. "He's a symbol of everything we strive to be, resilient, humble, and kind. Today, we honor him not only for his achievements in kickboxing, but also for the values he's instilled in all of us." Jack accepted the award with a sheepish smile, shaking hands with the mayor and thanking everyone for their support. When the ceremony ended, the crowd lingered, chatting and laughing over plates of cookies and lemonade. Ethan stood near his grandpa, watching as people approached him to express their admiration. It was clear that Jack's impact went far beyond his fighting skills. It was the way he treated others that truly mattered. Later that afternoon, as the last of the guests left, Ethan sat down beside Jack on the porch. "You know, Grandpa," he said thoughtfully, "I think this whole thing has taught me something important." "Oh yeah?" Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That it's okay to be proud of where you come from," Ethan replied. "Before I was embarrassed because people laughed at my stories, but now I realize that family legacies are worth celebrating, even if they're not perfect." Jack nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You're right, champ. Our stories shape us. They remind us of who we are and where we belong. And sometimes, sharing those stories can bring people closer together." Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. His grandpa's journey, from a young fighter chasing his dreams to an elderly man teaching kids about resilience, was proof that greatness wasn't defined by trophies or titles. It was about the connections we build and the lives we touch. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan continued to carry these lessons with him. At school, he became known as the kid who believed in standing up for what was right. When a new student joined his class and struggled to fit in, Ethan reached out, inviting him to sit with his group at lunch. When Mr. Grayson announced a charity drive to collect winter coats for families in need, Ethan volunteered to help organize it, rallying his classmates to pitch in. Even Lily Harper noticed the change in him. One day during recess, she walked up to him while he was reading under a tree. "Hey, Ethan," she said softly. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Ethan replied, closing his book. "What's up?" Lily hesitated for a moment, then blurted out, "How do you stay so calm when people make fun of you? I mean, you don't let it bother you anymore, and I wish I could be like that." Ethan thought about her question for a second. Then he shrugged. "I guess I realize that people will always say things. They'll laugh, tease, or judge. But none of that matters unless I let it define me. My grandpa taught me that. He showed me that being strong isn't about fighting back. It's about staying true to yourself." Lily smiled faintly. "That's really cool. Thanks for telling me." From that day on, Ethan and Lily grew closer. They started working on school projects together, sharing ideas and supporting each other. It was a friendship built on mutual respect, one that reminded Ethan of the importance of kindness. As winter approached, the town prepared for its annual holiday festival. This year, however, there was a new addition to the program, a storytelling booth hosted by none other than Jack Carter. Families lined up to hear him recount tales of his adventures, from thrilling matches in smoky arenas to quiet moments of reflection on life's bigger lessons. Ethan helped out by handing out hot chocolate and guiding visitors to their seats. Watching his grandpa light up as he spoke, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. On the final night of the festival, as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, Ethan found himself standing beside Chuck Norris once again. The legendary figure had returned for the event, eager to see how Jack's influence had grown. Together they watched as Jack wrapped up his last story of the evening, leaving the audience smiling and inspired. "You did good, kid," Chuck said, patting Ethan on the shoulder. "Your grandpa's proud of you, and so am I." Ethan grinned, feeling warmth spread through his chest. "Thanks, Mr. Norris. I couldn't have done any of this without you showing up that day," Chuck chuckled. "All I did was remind people of what they already knew. The rest was up to you." As the festival came to a close, Ethan walked home. With his family, the crisp air filling his lungs. He glanced at his grandpa, who was humming a tune under his breath, and felt a wave of love wash over him. This journey, this incredible, unpredictable journey, had changed everything. It had shown him the power of believing in himself, the importance of honoring his roots, and the beauty of connecting with others. And though life would undoubtedly bring more challenges, Ethan knew he was ready to face them. After all, he had learned from the best. His grandpa's legacy wasn't just a story, it was a way of living, and Ethan planned to carry that legacy forward, one step at a time.